Cool. Good afternoon, and welcome to this afternoon's event done in partnership with Movement Partners, whom I will name in a moment, entitled Anti-Racism and Allyship, How We Got Here and Our Path Forward. My name is Reggie Hubbard, Moveon's congressional liaison and senior political strategist, also this afternoon's moderator and proud Black American who has been waiting for this moment for his entire life. I'm a descendant of slaves that couldn't vote, and I help lead strategy and congressional outreach for a leading progressive organization. It was once extremely challenging for my ancestors to pursue higher education. I earned my undergraduate degree from Yale and received a master's in international management from a school in Europe. And my life's goal has been and remains to be brilliant in tribute to the countless lives lost, marginalized, or devalued at the hands of systemic racism in the United States. Each new incident hones my focus and fuels my activism, and you can do your part too. I'm sickened, disgusted, and exhausted at seeing innocent Black lives extinguished at the hands of law enforcement and other vestiges of white supremacy. Now is the time for transparency and tough conversations, not obfuscation and avoidance. If this makes you uncomfortable, y'all, don't look away, look deeper, and ask yourself why we as a society have been so silent about this for so long. And y'all, I'm gonna be honest. I never thought I'd see this day in my life on many levels. But in the wake of the heinous murder of George Floyd at the hands of Officer Derek Chauvin in Minneapolis, like shout out to Sister Ava DuVernay, who says say their names, and on the heels of the murder of Brother Arbery and Sister Breonna Taylor, we've seen an outpouring of collective resistance and peaceful protest, not only in 50 states, but in all corners of the globe. Bethlehem, Israel, Damascus, Syria, Auckland, New Zealand. Y'all, Willard Mitt Romney was walking in a Black Lives Matter protest. The creator of the sitcom Friends apologized for not having enough diversity when every Black person I know was always like, how is it going to be in New York and not have no people of color? You know, so at least she's coming around. The NFL admitted it was wrong for its complicit racism in 2016, while national energy began to swell at the murders of Brother Alton Sterling and Brother Philando Castile. At many levels, it truly feels like we're on the verge of historic change and in the midst of a generational awakening and cultural shift towards equal justice. And it couldn't come at a more important time. We're at a profound moment of cultural reckoning that is both sad and hopeful. So we're here tonight to kick off our live stream series done in partnership with progressive groups and in solidarity with the movement for Black lives. Justice, equality, and liberty for Black and Brown people matter at bare minimum, but they are worthy of and entitled to the same protections under law and access to the abundant fruits of this society that have consistently and systematically favored those who are of a lighter hue. Thank you to our partners in this broadcast, the Ballot Initiative Strategy Center, Bend the Arc, Karen Action, Center for International Policy, Daily Kos, Demos, For Our Future National, and For Our Future in Florida, Michigan, Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, Freedom Forward, Friends of the Earth, Indivisible, NARAL, Next Gen, NWLC, PCCC, Planned Parenthood Action Fund, Progressive Caucus Center Action Fund, Repower, Sierra Club, State Voices, Supermajority, the Wilderness Society, Ultraviolet, Win Without War, and the Working Families Party. And if I didn't mention your org, then maybe you can be involved in the series going forward. There's plenty of room at the table. We're at a monumental time in our history, y'all, where people are finally waking up to see things as they truly are. People for whatever reason until now with fresh eyes. And though at some point, many
Okay. Good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with a group of people who are deeply committed to answering the call of this particular challenge. As a historian of African American life and culture, every time a moment like this unfolds, guided to the past, to think about the context and the framework, also to think about how the past really allows us to unlock our creativity. So I think that the most important thing for folks who are organizations that are collaborating around the mission of allyship is to help us understand that the type of community that we're now is a struggle in and of it, let alone as we respond to these kind of larger challenges. And what do I mean by that? I think for me, that it to the matter of normalizing the historical, sharing the narrative of the historical work of struggle, as well as the work of conflict in animating struggle. I think that there is a way that we flatten the let's say the American Civil Rights Movement, let's say the feminist movement, in one in which people are kind of moved into coalition, and then there's some of a, and then we kind of forget the narrative. But the real story, I think, is the ways that coalitions stay strong and the ways that people respond to conflict. And within the context, I think, of a lot of nonprofits and a lot of organizations, the culture around conflict is usually something that people really struggle to put in a context. And so I think that what we're now, as Reggie said in the opening, is new people are coming to a set of questions and a set of challenges, and they may feel like they don't know exactly how to address them. And this is why I think organizations looking at the histories that animate the particular issues they want to address, as well as their own internal histories, are better poised to move forward. So that's the kind of framework of history that's helpful. But in this particular moment, I think that what we're seeing is a deep confrontation with the consequences of capitalism, not just in terms of inequality, but the ways that policing is designed to protect this idea of private property, and the ways that that humans are caught within that machinery. And so, what is incredibly gratifying to see is the ways that the pandemic helped expose the precarity and the cracks in so many systems. It raised the level of consciousness, and then this recent rounds of have helped people transition from that consciousness, manifestations, and action. And so I think that coincidence that we've seen the conversation about what kind of social safety net can we have in a health when response is $1,200. What do we do with the fact that we have people that we are celebrating from heroes and workers, but they're not necessarily organized, that if they become ill, that they don't have access to health resources, that we don't have mechanisms of care within communities. And so I think that when you have a pandemic and the rise of a protest movement at the same time, allows people to reevaluate what are the structures that we're trying to protect, and the way that policing is then motivating that. Can people you can't really hear me?
More or less.
I'm cutting the challenges of our time. I'm going to and pass it on to a person who perhaps has better internet connection, and then maybe I can return to the conversation, move into another.
Yeah, sure. Marcia, thank you for that. And I even had some internet issues as well. Let me now introduce Charlene Carruthers to the conversation. Charlene is a political strategist and writer and a leading community organizer in today's movement for Black liberation. With over 15 years of experience in racial justice, feminist, and youth leadership development work, Charlene has passionately developed young leaders to build capacity within marginalized communities on such issues as immigrant rights, economic justice, and civil rights campaigns nationwide. As the founding director of BYP 100, she has worked alongside hundreds of young Black activists to build a national base of activist member-led organizations between Black youth 18 to 35 dedicated to creating justice and freedom for all Black people. Charlene is the founder and executive director of the Chicago Center for Leadership and Transformation, a locally rooted and nationally connected learning community for political education, grassroots organizing, language, and strategic communications capacity building. Charlene is the author of the best-selling book, Unapologetic, a Black queer feminist mandate for radical movements. And her work has been covered in several publications, including the New York Times, the Washington Post, Chicago Reader, The Nation, Ebony, and Essence magazines. A believer in telling more complete stories about the Black radical tradition, Charlene provides critical analysis and political education and leadership development to training activists all across the globe. Charlene, thank you for being here. And please share from us, from your perspective, the significance of the Black radical tradition to social progress and how that tradition is at play in this moment.
Well, thank you all so much for having me today. We are living in a moment that I also didn't believe I would see in my lifetime. And at the same time, I'm very clear that we were all made for this moment. We were all made to show up in this moment and do the work that is necessary to be done. So what we're witnessing right now are uprisings in the aftermath of the killings of several Black people, including George Floyd here in Minneapolis, Tony McDade in Tallahassee, Florida, Breonna Taylor in Kentucky. Frankly, there are too many names to name. And also I think about Black trans folks, particularly Nita Potts, a Black trans woman who was found killed in her apartment. So Black people are living under the heel of many types of violence in this moment, and folks are saying no more. I think it's extremely important to note that the context in which people are rising up in is also within a global pandemic. The government, as Marcia was just sharing, the government expected people to live and survive on $1,200 to survive a pandemic, and a pandemic that's disproportionately impacting Black people, both in people who are dying from and suffering from COVID-19 in this country. And then the third piece, which is connected to that $1,200 that folks were expected to survive on, are the centuries of not only divestments, but centuries of not having what we need in our communities in order to live and to thrive. And so on the ground, I can't speak for what's happening on the ground across the country. We are in a moment where in my lifetime, I've never seen mass action at this scale. We've seen mass action in every single state in this country and in well over a dozen countries across the world. It's a global movement when we're talking about Black liberation and when we're talking about this particular moment that we're in right now. So what do people want? Well, in the face of everyday police violence, police surveillance, harassment, assault, and massive budgets. In my city of Chicago, we have a budget of just over $1.7 billion that goes to the Chicago Police Department every single year. And that amounts to about $5 million a day that literally goes into the coffers of surveillance and violence in our communities at the hands of the police department. And so people are calling for the defunding of police departments across the country. And when I say defund, I don't mean take $5 away. I mean literally what the word means. Defund, take money from. That's what we're talking about. And the reason why we're hitting at money is because money is a central site of power in this country. And power is organized people, which includes the government, the Fraternal Order of Police or the police unions, the police departments themselves, how they organize themselves, and how their money and their resources are also organized, right? And so we're saying we want to disorganize all of that and reorganize those resources into power into our communities. And so when you see people on the streets every single day, they're showing up while knowing that it's highly likely that police departments will enact violence upon them, that they will be tear gassed, that they will be pepper sprayed, that they will be beaten with batons, it's likely that they will be taken to jail. all of these things are possible, and even more likely for Black folks who are going out there to protest. And they also know that it is possible within a global pandemic to impact their lives, to have their lives impacted by COVID-19. So it is that serious. It is that serious of an issue that people know that all of our lives are on the line. What we're also seeing are people who are not Black showing up in different ways, in necessary ways in this moment. And so when we're out there or on the internet or in our homes or in our neighborhoods saying that we want to live in a world where the power that the police has is put in our community public schools, in healthcare. I know y'all believe in universal healthcare. Y'all been fighting for Medicare for all for a long time. Guess one additional place that money can come from on the local level are these ridiculous police department budgets, right? In Chicago, our so-called Democratic progressive mayor stripped our city of a large majority of its public mental health clinics. We could fund that with the money that we spend on things that don't keep us safe, mainly the police. But then in addition to people calling for on the streets for the defunding of police departments, many of us are also calling for a broad political vision and strategy of the abolition of the prison industrial complex. And what do I mean when I say that? We're thinking about a world where prisons or police don't exist and where we can all be safe. And to anyone who's like, what is she talking about? I implore you to follow up and get curious about what this is. And there's actually a group of abolitionists who came up with a set of demands, and there's a website, 8 to Abolition. And I'm gonna read these off. And I want people to move into an imagination space. It includes defunding the police. Imagine if our communities were demilitarized. Imagine if police weren't in our schools. Imagine if the way we deal with conflict, harm, and violence were outside of prisons and jails, but actually in real ways and not just putting issues and problems behind bars and in cages. If we repeal laws that criminalize survival, if we invested in community self-governance, if we provided safe housing for everyone, and if we invested in care and not in policing. Imagine that responded with care and not a gun and accusations. This is both an imagination space and a space for great possibilities. The young people in Chicago are saying, we don't want the $33 million contract that the city of Chicago has with the Chicago Police Department to go into policing our public schools. They want that $33 million to go towards counselors, librarians, books, arts, sports, their lives and their future. And so that is what we are seeing happening on the ground right now. People are rising up in mass protests, but people are also providing mutual aid. People are doing political education. People are organizing their local legislatures, as they are in Minneapolis, in which the city council voted for their intent to disband the Minneapolis Police Department and to actually move towards a process of creating systems and institutions for community safety beyond policing. We're seeing school districts break their contracts with police departments. And that is the result of years of organizing. None of this happened overnight. No one organization is responsible for it. No single person is responsible for it. It is literally an effort of scores of people. And unfortunately, we won't know everybody's name. And we also don't know everybody's name from the past, 400 or so plus years of struggle that Black people have been in this country, across the Western Hemisphere, and on the continent of Africa against chattel slavery, colonialism, militarism, and imperialism. And if you are a white person watching this right now, you not only have a duty to take up the work of anti-racism, I implore you to take up the duty to fight anti-Blackness, to fight transphobia, homophobia. What else are the other kids of patriarchy, capitalism, and white supremacy? All of those things, because they are all connected. And we need everybody in this fight. And we especially need white folks to go out and organize with other white folks who are committed to anti-racism and dismantling all systems of oppression.
Cool. Charlene, thank you for those powerful words. And before we introduce our next guest and then get into the panel, I want to say this at the beginning, y'all. Like, this is a journey that we're on. Like, more often, I've been in the progressive space for quite some time, and people trying to rush somewhere. Y'all, racism's not going to be solved by the end of tonight's call. It's not going to be solved by the end of this series, and it may not even be completely solved in my lifetime. But in this moment, the veil has been pulled back. People's hearts and minds are open. And as Sister Carruthers mentioned, like, we need you to focus on these other things, right? We need you to we need to use your privilege, use your white privilege and white access to fight for not only anti-racism, but anti-Black behavior, like anti-marginalized communities, like behavior that is entrenched in our system. Use your privilege to dismantle these things and not just stare in silence. I mean, and what I said in my yoga class this week, get out of the head space, get into the heart space. We're people too, right? And our struggles are real, our pain is real. And so don't be washed in shame. Put that shame into action, do something with it. Without further ado, this gentleman needs no introduction, but I'll try and give him a sufficient one anyway. Rashad Robinson is the executive director for Color of Change and is a tireless champion for policies and interventions that challenge ubiquitous injustice for Black people in America, holding corporate and political leaders accountable with cutting-edge research and tactics that advance solutions for racial justice that transform our world. His visionary leadership is well respected, as are the acumen, creativity, and results that the Color of Change organization brings to the beautiful struggle for racial justice, Black liberation, and transformative progressive change. Color of Change is the nation's largest online racial justice organization, and they 1.7 million members move as decision makers to make the world more human and less hostile for Black and brown people. I want to take moderator privilege, Brother Robinson, and thank you for your words of inspiration on Oprah's program. The moment can lead to better results for all people.
First of all, thank you, Reggie, and thank you to all the organizations who are co-sponsoring this event. It's a pleasure to be on, and you all have been our partners on so much of the work, so many of the campaigns, so many of the efforts that we have worked to drive. It's always a tough act to follow Sister Carruthers. Charlene is such a light and a visionary in our work, someone who continues to push us not only on what can be possible, but really focusing on the sort of places and interventions that we need to keep our eyes on, making sure that as we are looking to build movements that win, that we are constantly making sure that we are clear about what winning looks like and ensuring that winning looks like all of us winning. And so I just really appreciate you, Charlene. I love you, sister, and it's an honor to be on with you. Marcia, thank you as well, and to thank you to everyone who's watching. And so I want to talk a little bit about three things actually. One is what we say in this moment. I want to talk about what we do in this moment, and I want to talk about what we're winning in this moment. And I want to keep us focused on how we keep this energy moving forward. So I want to talk a little bit about what we say, because I'm talking to some allies here. I'm talking to a lot of people who are allies or co-conspirators, or people who are just coming online about sort of how do we engage in this moment. And I want to sort of disrupt some of the things we say about justice, about equality, about how we talk about the world that we want. And I think far too often we tell stories that are unfortunate. We talk about inequality as unfortunate, almost like it's a car accident. It sort of just happened, rather than talking about it as unjust. And when we talk about inequality, we talk about racism as unfortunate, we end up getting charitable solutions to structural problems. We get people super excited about sending water bottles to Flint instead of challenging the corporations that create a tax structure where those communities can never actually have clean pipes. We get people excited about inner city school service days where they're cleaning up schools instead of actually dealing with a set of corporate policies and tax policies that have left our schools in austerity and ensure from the very beginning that certain people get an education in this country and certain people don't. And so we have to sort of unlock the ways in which we tell our stories, moving from unfortunate to unjust, so that we don't end up with charity, but we end up with justice. We end up with structural change. And so I want to talk a little bit about some of the ways in which we do that so we can maybe get better. So I hear a lot of people talk about Black communities as vulnerable. Black communities and Black people are vulnerable. Well, vulnerability is a personal trait. Sometimes we are vulnerable when we feel under attack. We're vulnerable when maybe we see an X on social media a little too happy. We feel vulnerable, and when we're vulnerable, we may have to work on ourselves. That's like your therapy time. And so the problem with talking about Black communities as vulnerable is that what ends up happening, and far too often happen, is people put their energy on fixing Black people and Black families instead of fixing the structures and systems that hold us back. And so we need to put our energy there, because we will hear people say things like Black people are less likely to get loans from banks instead of banks are less likely to give loans to Black people. We will see Black folks are less likely to get hired for jobs in tech instead of tech companies are less likely to hire Black people. And then we end up with mentorship programs to try to deal with systemic exclusion. So when we put the energy, the active voice on the systems instead of the active voice on the people, then we actually unlock the potential to actually move us towards real change, towards the type of change that actually changes the systems and structures. And so now I want to pick up where Charlene sort of left off in some ways, but also just talk about it from a space of some of the things that we're doing, the color of change, with a deep recognition that we are a movement full of leaders and organizations, and you should be following many. You should be engaged on the local level with folks in your own community, and you should be engaged at the national organization level with folks who represent many different views. And so we are in a place where there are some very aspirational, big picture demands and visions that we need to be talking about and putting energy around. Ideas that really talk about and push us towards a world where policing and prisons and incarceration are not a reality in our society. And we need to be building sort of the energy for what that can look like and how that is possible. And then we have all sorts of other sort of ideas in between those things. I do want to say, though, that we don't have necessarily an ideas problem in our movement. Black folks have tons of ideas for how to change and shape these issues. We have a power problem. We have a problem with the ability to actually implement our policies and hold on to them. I'm going to talk about some things we're doing, but I want us to consistently center our eyes on how we can build the type of power to change the rules. How do we translate the presence and visibility and awareness of this moment into the power to actually change this? Because when we mistake presence for power, we think that, I don't know, a Black president means that we've gotten to be post-racial, that a lot of Black pop stars that we all celebrate means that America loves Black people as much as it loves Black culture, and it can hate Black people and love Black culture at the same time, and those two things don't actually have to be in conflict. And so mistaking presence for power, this visibility and awareness of this moment, this outpouring of energy, can sort of lead us to thinking that we've gotten to things that we actually haven't gotten to, that we've won things that we actually haven't won. And so with that said, sort of we are moving on a couple of things. First, millions of folks have signed our petitions: justice for George Floyd, justice for Ahmaud Arbery, justice for Breonna Taylor, justice for so many of the folks who we are fighting for all around the country. And that is important because we are working to do everything we can to ensure them and their families get the type of justice that they deserve, as well as giving people who may never have even thought about activism as a tool for them to sort of make change in this world, giving them an on-ramp to that ability. And so that is part of the fight, and that is part of the energy, but that alone, right, is insufficient for their families, insufficient for all of us, insufficient for this moment. And so we are also working at the national level and the local level to ensure that we actually start moving to strategies about invest and divest. Divesting from the things that we consistently put money into, from militarized policing in schools, as Charlene said, sending someone with a gun to deal with homelessness, sending someone with a gun to deal with kids, sending someone with a gun to deal with the problems in our society. What would it look like if the communities that now have a lot of police but no fresh food, no healthcare facilities, no economic development, had those things? What would it look like if we can ensure that our streets were safe because we've actually invested in them, not because we had some false idea of safety that included police, when a lot of police on the streets are not safe for all of us? And so I want to say that we open our imagination to what investing and divesting looks like, investing in the things that we need. We're all clear that we have to have a world with consequences, have to have a world where we can all feel safe, have to have a world where there are ways in which we deal with violence. But we also have to have a world where we are looking at our budgets as moral documents, where we put our money to the things that actually matter and putting it behind the things and taking away from the things that don't. I want to say that two more things. The first is that right now we are launching a campaign to deal with the barriers that stand in our way. Far too often, we once again talk about the ideas that we want to push, but not necessarily the barriers we have to overcome. And we can't deal with the guns in this country without dealing with the NRA. And we cannot deal with criminal justice and police accountability without dealing with the Fraternal Order of Police. And we have to hold a high standard for the politicians who come into our communities and say, I'm with you, but then go back by night and take FOP money. We actually have to create a new standard for folks who are given a gun but tell us that racial profiling doesn't exist. They cannot be trusted. They are out of line with sort of the theory. They're operating from a different perspective, right? When they sort of pretend that no problems exist. It's one thing when someone on the other side says, I don't agree with your policies. I don't agree with sort of what you're demanding. It's another thing when they gaslight us and tell us that there's no problems with policing. There's no problems with justice in this country. We're going to need white allies. We're going to need people of all races to stand with us as we work to fight the forces that have far too often prevented us from actually truly getting to safety and justice. I want to invite you into work that we're doing at winningjustice.org, which is our prosecutor platform. It's the only searchable database of the 2,400 prosecutors in this country. Prosecutors are the most powerful actors in the criminal justice space. And all around the country, they are making decisions about whether or not to prosecute police, whether or not to deal with criminal justice. 70% of DAs in this country, prosecutors, run unopposed. 90% of prosecutors are white. If we don't actually deal with local elected prosecutors in this country, we're not going to shift the power balance in this immediate moment to actually deliver, because the vast majority of people are incarcerated or deal with policing at the local level. And that's where we have to actually rewrite and redirect the power imbalance. And then finally, I want to end on this idea of culture. Because for the last 20 years in this country, violent crime has steadily went down. But if you look at polling from Pew and other places, folks believe that violent crime is going up. There is a deep gap between perception and reality, and that gap is killing us. That gap is creating all sorts of demands for things that we don't need. It makes it hard for us to actually get to invest, divest, because people think that crime is right around the corner because they're being fed it on their TV. These magical worlds of crime TV shows where they're very diverse on air, but the writers' rooms are not, where you end up with a world of Black and brown people on TV in these magical worlds, but racism doesn't seem to exist. We have the ability to change that, and we have a platform called changehollywood.org that I hope people join us at. Changehollywood.org is where we have done research, and we've had some recent wins where a long struggle, Charlene knows this because she was at Color of Change back when we started this, we finally dealt a final blow to Cops, the TV show, getting it off of Paramount after getting it off of Fox years ago. We've gotten recently Live PD off of A&E as well, a show that we've been pushing A&E around. We've got a couple more of these reality TV shows that create a fantasy world of where police are always right, where we're following them around and creating a sort of fictionalized world of the war on drugs, poverty, race, without any sort of representation of the reality of how policing works. If they want to do crime reality shows, they should go to Capitol Hill and Wall Street, where the type of crime that actually impacts us at structural levels is happening every single day. And the final thing I want to say is that we are in this moment where we're seeing a lot of images of Black people on videos being harmed and hurt. We are seeing all sorts of pain out in the street. And I want to encourage my allies, folks who have platforms that are pushing out stories of Black pain, that we also have to center Black brilliance, Black creativity, Black joy. Black people are the protagonists in the American story. No one has worked harder in this country to make it what it is. No one has fought harder to be educated, to fight for the right to vote, to reshape this country and to undo the norms that have hurt all of us from actually being our full selves. And if we don't center Black people as the protagonists in this story, we are not actually doing the work to tell the full truth about where we need to go. And so when I talk about centering Black joy, and when we talk about centering it at Color of Change, and my Vice President, Marcia Hatch, talks about Black joy through our political work, we are not talking about the absence of pain, but the presence of aspiration, not just what we are fighting against, but what we are fighting for. And so I want us to join in this idea that as much as we are working to fight for a better tomorrow, that we are recognizing that we are not just fighting for charity, but we are fighting for the type of structural change that changes the rules. And that, I believe, is how we make justice real, and that is how we make freedom possible.
Rashad, thank you for that. Thank you for your brilliance and wisdom as always. And before I welcome the panel back on, I want to say as a former civics educator, I'm almost compelled to say, get your pen and paper ready to take some notes, or however best you retain information, because now's the time to learn. And before we start the panel, I want to highlight our call to action that I will also reiterate at the end of the program. So text anti-racism to 668-366 to sign up for more information about future offerings that we have on the Anti-Racism and Allyship series. Again, text anti-racism to 668-366 to sign up for more information about future anti-racism trainings and videos. So now that we have everybody back, first of all, thank you all for your wisdom and thank you all for your passion. And let's just begin at the beginning, right? And Rashad, I know you have a heart out, so I want you to answer this question first, but it's for all of y'all on the panel. You know, we have many people online, perhaps for the first time, learning about many of these issues in light of the tragic murder of Brother Floyd. Whereas for many of us, to some extent, the narrative of Black and Brown communities being subjected to over-policing and police brutality is nothing new whatsoever. So what do you think is different in this moment? What is it about this moment that was not present with Brother Lister, or Brother Castile, or these other things? What is it about this moment, starting with you, Rashad, and then we'll go to everybody else?
Well, I think they're all building on one another. I mean, Charlene talked, I think, really brilliantly about the movements and how things have been growing. And I don't think these things just happen overnight. For the last 7 years, we've had movements and uprisings. We've had education and context building. We've had white people taking out their cell phones in a Starbucks and filming something and then posting it online. And the movement actually created that context for them to actually know that that was something they could do. We have had folks saying it was racist to talk about racism, then it was racist to say Black Lives Matter. And then you have people, corporations putting hashtag Black Matter, Lives Matter out, but not necessarily changing their policies. And it's all part of a continuum that we have to continually push. And so I don't want us to think that these things just happen overnight and that there's not infrastructure and work and movement building. But we have been dealing with a whole set of real life sort of illustration of how the failures of our system, the targeting of Black people, allowed for a global pandemic to rush through our communities and through Indigenous communities in a very deep and targeted way. And people saw that. And then people were in their homes. And then we had these killings. We've had the videos of Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd. We had the sort of callousness and sort of all the ways that the rules failed Breonna Taylor in that her partner had a gun license. She was a first responder in a moment of a pandemic. All of these things are sort of on display. And then I want to be really clear for my white brothers and sisters on this call. Then we got that Amy Cooper video. And I want to say, because very rarely do we get the strategy in front of us. Yeah. Right? Like her calling and then her saying it's an African-American man. So sometimes we get gaslit, right? Where it's like, oh, that's not really racist. Or are you sure? Are you just claiming it's racist? You know, we don't get the benefit of the doubt. But in this moment, she gave us all of the pieces. And she knew that she was doing it the same way with that police officer in Minneapolis looking at the camera. In both places, they had become deeply comfortable with the sort of prevalence of cameras filming and thought that it was okay what they were doing. I actually think that it disrupted a lot of the sort of ability for people to sit on the sidelines. And so the question really is, once again, and I will end here, is that for folks who are getting involved now, make no mistake, you're not going to end systemic racism, structural inequality. You're not going to end it for Black people at the intersection of many different experiences, from gay, lesbian, bisexual, trans, to women, to working class, to immigrants, to you're not going to end it for Black folks at the intersection of all those experiences with sort of like 8 simple policies. You are only going to actually do it by getting involved in being in this work long term and being able to think of yourself not just as an ally, but as a co-conspirator. Racism hurts all of us.
Absolutely.
Racist policies have been used to do the work, to undermine all the type of things that we want, from universal health care to safe and quality schools to a tax policy that's equitable. Racial appeals have driven them. And it's going to be up to white people to help lead the effort to dismantle it. And that has to be part of the work. And that's what I think has to be different. So we're in a different place in terms of the people showing up. Will we be in a different place in terms of people actually staying in the game?
Great question, and thank you for that. Charlene or Marcia,
I would add that the thing that is different now is that the political education and the civic lesson of the movement for Black Lives is being applied in this moment.
Uh-huh.
We've had a movement that has been clear about a number of things that we're seeing how well that works. The idea that you cultivate leadership on the local level and that there is room for a lot of people to lead has allowed us the capacity to see, oh, leadership in Minneapolis will look different in Miami, will look different in Newark, and accept that and internalize that as a positive thing versus the critiques of movements that were coming out of 2014 of where's your one leader and what's the one statement. And so we now have the capacity to see the leadership potential of people on the local ground. We saw the incredible success of mutual aid and redefining action away charity and benevolence to one of immersion in community. And what we've also seen, the real power of what happened with the Ferguson uprising is that it raised people's consciousness, the fact that we don't have a centralized expectation for policing. We have all of this local level policymaking that makes no sense, and an endorsement by the federal government and component of it by the Department of Justice. And so in unlocking the tragedy of Ferguson and the ridiculous ways in which police departments have been allowed to operate, we now have a lens in which to understand what happened in Minneapolis and what defund means and the problems with reform. And so in many ways, I think that we have a national maturity now of understanding the lessons that people could not understand when the movement for Black Lives emerged, because they had yet to fully realize the fallacies that it was unlocking. And so in many ways, as difficult as this moment is, and vindication is the wrong word, but I think the proof is in the pudding, that now you do not have to walk through all the steps for people to understand what these calls are about, because they've been learning very good lessons for the past few years.
Brilliant. Thank you for that wisdom. Charlene, anything to offer?
Very briefly, that we learned a lot in the past 6 years since the movement for Black Lives as a formation was created. And people are showing up in this moment carrying those lessons that have been learned. And I'm deeply grateful to be here in this time, but that's all I'll say for now.
Right on. Thank you for that. Second question for the panel, and Rashad, again to you, because I know you got a heart out soon. There's been a lot of hand wringing and pearl clutching with respect to the term defund the police that Sister Charlene talked a little bit about. But can each of you speak to what that means to you and why this is important, not only in response to the passing of Brother Floyd, but in the context of the long history of police brutality toward Black and brown people?
Well, since I have a heart out, I'm going to go quick because I really want to hear what other folks have to say and pass the mic. But I talked about it. I really think about this means really investing money in the things that our communities need and divesting things for the money from the things that don't keep us safe. Our communities, when I'm in a barbershop in a pre-corona age, I know that, when I'm at a barbershop, when I'm, out in the world, people want safety and they want justice, and people want those things for themselves and their families, and they have not gotten them from the strategies that we've had with a lot of police on our streets. And we need to actually do the things that we do in communities that are actually have safety and justice.
Thank you, Rashad. Marcia?
I think that the thing that's fascinating when people are trying to wrap their heads around it is that it rarely occurs to people that these things are already being done in your name. You are funding state-sanctioned violence because public resources are being used to do that. And so I will talk to a group of, like if I'm in a mostly white audience, I would say most, if not all of you, would never burn a cross in someone's front yard. And people say, oh no, I would never do that. And I said, well, then what does it mean to fund entire systems that are allowed to act in these terroristic ways that you underwrite. And I think that the reason why people feel so distanced from those acts of violence is that we've given up on the idea that we are a public sphere. Everything is a corporate underwriting, everything is a charity. So people don't realize that they have already invested in this system. And so you can be appalled by these videos, but you should also understand that this is being done in your name. And as long as you can tolerate that or say, well, sometimes it's okay, but it's not, and the other times, then you will never fully kind of get your head around why this call to defund and dismantle is so important. And so I think that, listen, this will not be for everyone. And a lot of organizations are going to get in big fights, get big mad about this. And that is important. Because if you do not mediate the conflict about whether or not you want to have a relationship to a state entity that is ordained to do violence, then you have to be in that struggle too, because that is at the heart of, I think, what is being demanded upon people in this moment.
Thank you. And Rashad, I know you got to go, but I want to thank you for your time.
Thank you all. Thank you very much.
We'll see you in the fight.
Appreciate y'all. Thank you, sisters. Thank you, brother.
Blessings. Charlene.
Yeah, so the defund the police, meaning divest from police and invest in our communities, particularly Black communities, brown communities, indigenous communities, is not a new demand. It is not a new demand at all. The first time I actually learned about the vision it was actually called Justice Reinvestment, and out of the Ella Baker Center. And BYP 100 in 2015, alongside a number of organizations, we did actions, lobby days across the country calling for the funding of Black futures. We said, stop the cops, fund Black futures. We did that. We did direct action. We did a number of things locally and nationally. And I think it's very important for y'all to know that people didn't just start thinking about this. This wasn't something that just happened to emerge in this moment. BYP 100 also developed the agenda to build Black futures, which also walk through specific policies that could be implemented while we defunded and divested from police. And so I understand why some people may be afraid of what a world looks like, or a country or a neighborhood looks like without police. The reality is that many of you already know what that's like, because you don't live in neighborhoods that are surveilled by police agencies every single day. You may have grown up and still hold a semblance of trust and faith in the police department. And if you're not one of those folks and you still say, I don't know about this, imagine if you had other options. Imagine if you actually had other options in front of you all your life to the police. Knowing that on one hand, they don't keep you safe, and that's the only option that many of us as Black people have ever had. And so the defund vision is actually, for me and many people within the movement for Black Lives, a part of a broader vision of abolition. And it's one part in a broader vision of how we radically transform how we deal with conflict, violence, and harm in this country. And that is a long-term struggle, because my people weren't enslaved, then put under economic and racial segregation of Jim Crow, housing segregation, mass incarceration, the so-called war on drugs overnight. That didn't happen overnight. And we are not going to get out of where we are overnight. That requires reparations. It requires a radical transformation of public safety in this country. It requires healing for our people. All of those things are essential in turning this country around.
Thank you for that. One thing I'll offer is that I was listening to Brother Michael Eric Dyson earlier today, and his definition of defunding the police is having them execute their responsibilities without executing Black and brown people.
I disagree with that.
Yeah.
I disagree with that. No, that's not what we mean.
That's what he said, but I'm just
that's not what we mean. That's not what I mean.
Yeah.
Well,
right.
Here's the challenge of that framework, because remember when reform was the story? Remember if all the police just wore body cameras, it would be all good because they were caught on tape, and then you realize you could turn them off or edit the video, or just not give. Can I say fuck? Or just not give a fuck about what you see. Sorry. We're good. Here's the thing. We have every good idea we have not tried. And every bad idea, we keep on putting more money into it.
There you go.
And
Right.
we saw tanks in Ferguson, and we said, no, we couldn't do that anymore. And then under a new administration, you can put them back on the streets. This is, I mean, this hand slapping that has happened for a very long time, we have seen is not working. And so while I understand some of the kind of motivations of organizations that are saying, okay, we can't join defund, we have to do reform. We have a long history of these types of reforms don't work because it's not about the equipment, and it's not about the training, and it's not about the like field trips. It's about the ways that an entire force of people are deployed to protect white supremacy and property. And so I know it's hard in our guts to think that we can, get so upset about mass incarceration and get so upset about these things, but they don't just linger in one place. And so the consciousness that has been raised about mass incarceration, this is also what's happening with policing, where it has to be intolerable for us to understand that we can't dance with this because it's so dangerous.
My gosh, if I can pop in here.
Please, yeah.
As Marcia just shared, did I pronounce your first name right? Marcia.
It's okay. But
Marcia, my apologies. As Marcia just said, their function, their essential function, their role is to protect white supremacy and capitalism, property. That's what their function is. And so it's actually not possible to serve their essential function without enacting violence upon Black people. And the violence is, yes, shooting and killing, beating and killing, chokeholding and killing. It is also sexual violence, which is the number 2 most reported type of misconduct by police officers in this country. So we're talking about a web of things that exist. What I should have mentioned earlier is what we're seeing, and I talked about it a little bit, that is evolved from 6 years ago. We saw it in Ferguson. Oaklandites know it very well. We saw it in Chicago. We saw it in Charlotte and in Baton Rouge. Is the militarized response from police. The tanks, the tear gas, the pepper spray, the beating of people. We're seeing that not in just, the usual suspects, and we saw it in Baltimore too. Yep. We're literally seeing it in dozens of places across the country. And so when the state shows up in that way, or police show up in that way, people are able to activate parts of themselves that they may not have been able to activate before.
Right. Thank you for that, Charlene. Marcia, I wanted to give you a couple of moments since the internet went out earlier. Did you just want to continue your remarks before we have the last question?
All I got to say is history, everybody. You're a part of organizations and you have these retreats. And before you bring in your experts on racial stuff, just sit and look at the history of your organizations, because so many of the organizations that are doing this work professionally, they emerged in a context, and it's that post-1968 era where foundations and think tanks and universities, they're saying, okay, we got to use our resources, we got to solve these problems. And a lot of their problems were in this idea that if you just diversify, then everything's fine. You get Black professors like me teaching white students, and that I was going to change everyone's life, and it doesn't work like that. And so I think what every person who's at the head of an organization, who's sick to their stomach in this moment, has to also interrogate is the power dynamics within those organizations that are on the right side of history. Because the thing I do like about this moment is everyone is being put on blast on Twitter. I have to say, I enjoy it. I enjoy it because the fearlessness that we see in the street is being mirrored in the people who would have said, I'm going to keep my head down and be quiet because I really need this job. The coronavirus is making things so unstable. We're about to enter an era of austerity. We are so precarious. There's a recession. And they're like, you know what? I still don't care. I'm going to name what is happening. And that has been really kind of moving. And so, but what these narratives aren't just about feeling bad. They're about saying that this whole idea that you just change the color around and everything is fine, it needs to be more substantive. And so as we think about who we're going to run for elections, who we're supporting, who's on our boards, who's going to make decisions about what we fund, are we going to get behind abolition or not? We have to remember that these solutions that we came up in the past came in a context and they're still unfinished and unresolved business. So why not take a more radical approach to how power works within your organizations?
And I appreciate that. And I appreciate both of y'all's remarks in the context of reimagining, because while people want to focus on what makes us fearful, what makes me hopeful are that these ideas of reimagining our society are at play, and like in the streets, like people are actually taking action for that. Last question I have for the panel. So before we sign off for the evening, because we want people to, like, this is an education series, so we want people to have homework, teacher, right? So can each of you let people know, where to follow your work, so we can keep them engaged on the good work that you're doing, and one concrete step they can take to expand their anti-racist education and orientation? Because we all know it's not enough to think about being anti-racist. You have to remain committed to unlearning these patterns and create new ones. So what would you all have? So where can we find your work, and what advice would you give, practical steps for people to maintain this anti-racist orientation and education? Charlene, I'll start with you.
Sure. You can find me on pretty much all the big social media platforms. I'm Charlene Carruthers on Instagram, Charlene CAC on Twitter, and my website is charlenecarruthers.com. My book is available in English and Spanish, Unapologetic, a Black queer and feminist mandate for radical movements. If you want to listen to my Up South twang, you can get it in Audible or audio version, and it's also, of course, available in an ebook. You also check out m4bl.org, letter M, number 4, B as in Black, L as in lives.org. You can text defend to 90975 to find out the work that the Movement for Black Lives is, find out more and get plugged into the work that the Movement for Black Lives is leading. And the things that y'all can do, this is always an interesting question when talking to mostly not Black people about what you can do about anti-racism, is study with other people, and get curious about what's happening in the institutions that you belong to. What is going on at your workplace? Listen to people at your workplace. Listen to people at the school that you attend, in the healthcare facility, your faith-based institutions. I don't know of an institution in this country that is completely absent of the legacies of white supremacy, anti-Blackness, patriarchy, capitalism, all of those things. And so get real curious and start to listen and commit to a lifelong journey, and knowing that you are not going to figure it all out today, and that whether or not you did it yourself, you benefit from what your ancestors did and what your people continue to do to mine.
Right. Thank you, Charlene. Marcia.
So you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Dr. M. Chatelain. I just published a book called Franchise, The Golden Arches in Black America, that talks about how McDonald's became Black after 1968, in a moment very similar to this, in which people were crying out for justice and they got fast food. And in that vein, I want people to remain really vigilant about when the protests start to quiet down and when we enter the next cycle of change, to be so vigilant about the ideas, whose ideas they are, and who's benefiting from them. I really, 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 really want us to think about what a public sphere can look like, what a world without underwriting can look like from either a foundation or corporation. I know that's your bread and butter out there, but I want us to imagine a public sphere. And I also, in terms of anti-racism, I will always tell you to look at history. For those of you who are bewildered about this moment, I want you to look at all of the great, they call them riot commission reports since 1919, and you will see that the same themes are there. We want the police to stop brutalizing us. We want decent housing. We want jobs. We want schools for our kids. We want to be able to be treated with respect when we purchase things in stores. Those 5 requests are in every major commission report. And I want you to reflect on the fact that people have made it clear what they need for over a century and why that hasn't happened. And then for white allies out there, here's a project you can do with your families. If you have other people in your household, it's a very easy project. I want you to research your address. Know that all of these forces have contributed to the communities in which you live. So think about the generations that have lived in your address, if you can, your neighborhood, and what it's joyful struggle and joyful practice.
The one thing I would add to, I don't really have much to say in response to that, but y'all do this together, right? So like, I want to echo what Marcia said, like, talk about this with your family. like get an accountability buddy, talk about some of the reflections that you had from this this live stream webinar. Don't stay in your head by yourself, right? Tell someone what you're thinking. Tell someone what you're feeling. Like, I'm an organizer, I can't help but think that. So like, you can't keep this to yourself, right? If you took notes today, call someone in your family and be like, hey, guess what I just learned? Like, speak what you've learned, because that not only like gives credence to what we've done today, but it implants it in your mind. It begins to do that rewiring that is essential to unlearn anti-racism and to unlearn white supremacy. So don't like take your notes by yourself. Share them with your family. Share them with some of your friends. Have a tough conversation with one of your relatives who thinks this is a bunch of mess, right? We can't lean away from this moment, y'all. Like, it's here, right? So rather than lean away from this moment, we need to look deeper and ask what we can do in this moment, and what is this lesson? What's the lesson in this moment? What's it trying to teach us? So last call for comments, sisters. Yeah, if y'all got anything, speak up. No?
I got one thing to say.
Go for it, please.
Okay, last history bit. It is no coincidence that this struggle that has happened on the street includes the toppling of Confederate memorials and all that kind of nonsense. We are right now battling with the sickest form of kind of patriarchal worship. So whether it comes from the form of a police officer or the form of a statue, people are really fighting against this idea of hero worship and saviors, and I think it's just so good. So statues aren't history, history is history. So cut it out with your Confederate garbage.
Go ahead, Charlene, please.
I've seen a number of people in the chat say, don't forget to vote. I voted. I'm 34 years old. I've voted in every single election since I was 18 years old. No matter where I may have missed one or two, because no matter where I lived in the country. And so I want to start there and also say, for Black people, it has never been a simple matter of just voting. Sure. Even when we technically became legally able to vote, we saw what continues to happen in the state of Georgia. It is happening across the country, the suppression of our vote, people being purged from voter rolls. And that does something to you when year after year you are told to go do a thing, and oftentimes told to go do a thing for a candidate you don't even believe in.
Right.
And you do it, and then you don't see results, or you see little things and you don't feel it, and you see you and your community being taken for granted. So don't just tell Black people to vote. Don't just tell white people to vote. Voting is one tactic in what should be a much broader body of work that you do to engage with your community and with the world that you live in. And so please stop just telling people to vote. It should always be these things, and vote if you can, because frankly, not everybody can even vote. Still, many people are disenfranchised for many reasons, be it incarceration, citizenship status, any number of things.
The one thing I would say to help buttress that is that I worked very hard on the Amendment 4 campaign in Florida last cycle. And immediately once that was passed, the legislature tried to take it away. So my question especially for my white allies, is like, if voting wasn't so important, why are they trying to take it away from us all the time? Mm-hmm. So like, if it's no big deal, like, why do they purge these roles? Like Sister Charlene says, what's it about? Like, if anyone can do it, then why do you not want us to do it? Right? To me, therein lies the answer to white supremacy, right? And the maintenance of those structures. So, if y'all don't have any other questions or comments, I want to thank you all for your wisdom, for your activism. Like, please keep in touch with me. I'm at Reggie Global on all the platforms. Would love to uplift and support your work in any way that I can. And just thank you for your time here today.
Thank you.
Indeed. Sister Charlene, Sister Marcia, thank you very much.
Bye.